I finish this session with modification for fixation with the two screw of the bone block of the Latarjet procedure with the posterior tunnel placement. I said this morning I start arthroscopic Latarjet in 2007 after Laurent Lafosse, because it was very comfortable, because I have all tools for me in the hospital, because we work in the same hospital. And at the beginning, I was relatively unhappy with the design of the screw, because the bite of the screw is very poor, because the thread of the screw is very, very smooth. And I don't very happy. I moved to the Artrex screw because the thread is better and the bite of the screw is very strongly. And unfortunately, when the development, I used the first cannula in metallic cannula, and it was very difficult to manage bone block. And I searched a new technique, and I developed some guide from anterior, like Ettore Taverna, with the ACL guide to drill from front to back. But with the conjoint tendon, it was always difficult, and I don't have the good direction with my tunnels. And after the lecture of Ettore Taverna in CSEC in 2011, I understood the best way is from back to front to make a tunnel for underbutton or a screw. And in 2015, I was in Grenoble to watch a presentation of the symposium about arthroscopic Latarjet versus open Latarjet. And I was relatively impressed by the radiological study, because there is different cases from Gilles Walsh and Johan Barth for open procedure with guide and without guide, with technique from Laurent Lafosse with the free end positioning of the two tunnels for the screw, and the Boileau technique with the guide from back to front to create the tunnel. When you see this picture of the symposium, you see the difference of angle of the inferior screw. The best orientation is with the arthrobutton, with the endobutton from Pascal Boileau, and the worst was a free end technique from Laurent Lafosse. And for axial plane, it was the same. You don't have the best is with the endobutton with the posterior guide. And overhanging is the same problem. You can have some overhanging with a different arthroscopic technique. It's less with the open technique. But endobutton is definitively, posterior guide is definitively better. And you see the contact of two pieces of bone and the angle of contact. It's always better with the endobutton. And you see the positioning of the graft. But the conclusion of the symposium was there is no difference between endoscopic technique and open technique. I don't agree. I disagree with this conclusion, because radiologically it's totally different. And I mean, you need to improve the technique arthroscopic to have better positioning of the screw to be very comparable to the open procedure. The coracoid process fixation was described by Gilles Walsh in the Symposium of the French Orthopedic Society in 1999. And he recommended two screws, malleolar screws with a big cortical fixation, no washer, because at this time a lot of people use a very big peak washer to fix the coracoid, and he have some problem with the type of washer. The free end technique is more difficult to reproduce everywhere. And I use a posterior jig to create the two tunnels. I use a power rasp to prepare the glenoid surface, because I mean it's definitively easier and you don't make any wave over the glenoid surface to have the best contact as possible. It's a failure of Bankart repair, and you can remove everything by this way. You see the glenoid surface is very flat and it's perfect. You can check it very well. You prepare the subscapularis split as the previous technique. It's the same with you make the split between the medial third and the inferior third. And after I introduce the posterior jig. Sometimes it's difficult, and I cut with a radio frequency the posterior capsule. And you can have the good position of the guide in the best position as possible regarding the bare spot. And you must be very in the inferior part of the glenoid side. You need to check you have bone enough under the guide to be safe. We create a big bone defect, and you pull the first superior one in first. You pass a key wire into the first hole, and after you create the second tunnel, and you can remove it. Here you see the positioning of the hook of the jig. You connect the second part of the jig to the hook, and you drill. You drill the anterior one in first. You can check you have bone enough under the hook, and you pull the drill, and just after K-wires. And after you put the K-wire through the subscapularis split to the conjoint tendon. And after that, you can prepare the coracoid process. With a rasp, I mean you can make the coracoid process as flat as possible, especially proximally, and you have less bleeding than with a burr. And after you can cut it, you mobilize the coracoid process, and you fix it to the anterior guide with the two barrels. And you fix the inferior hole of the coracoid process, and after that, it's definitively easy to finish the preparation of the coracoid process. I use a Di Giacomo plate to reinforce the fixation of the coracoid process, and after, with the switching stick, I move the subscapularis down. And like the Chinese guy, he describes the plastic domain for the upper part. I elevate the upper part of the subscap with the drain, and I can move the coracoid process with a screw, and I fix it to the glenoid side. And we can check from the back, and if you have some bone to overhang, you can resect it with power rasp again, and you finish. You see it's perfectly flush, and you have two screws with the plate, and the direction of the screw is good, and you have no contact with the humeral head with the screw head. And you see the screw is in the middle of the coracoid process. It's not too lateral. And I agree with Tom. It's a very tricky step to prepare the coracoid and to make the whole of the coracoid in the right position to have less problem as possible. I mean, Pascal Boileau would like to change the guide to create the hole into the coracoid process because it was perfect when he put the coracoid process in stand-up position. In laying position, I mean, he need to change his guide, and our guide is more comfortable to use to create the two tunnels in the coracoid process. The tricky step is the coracoid process drilling, the subscapulary splitting because you need to be safe regarding the nerve, and the coracoid process fixation because you need to be very, very parallel to the glenoid surface. Arthroscopic technique, you need it's very demanding procedure, and you need to improve the tools as possible, as more as possible to make safe procedure and to be a reproducible procedure because it's a big problem for that. Coracoid preparation and drilling could be made outside, but you need to be very, very safe if you do that during arthroscopic procedure because with the swelling of the patient, sometimes you pull too much the conjoint tendon and you can have some damage and you create damage in the musculocutaneous nerve, and you must be very safe with this technique. Chair position is not always a good position for arthroscopic Latarjet. Tom mix the position during the procedure. Some guys use only lateral decubitus for arthro-Latarjet. But the most important point is the time of the procedure. It must be reduced to be comfortable for everybody, and especially for the patient. Learning curve must be reduced by the tools and very specific techniques. Thank you so much for your attention.